So what is in your technology toolbox? Just as in real life when we're using tools to complete a project, we have different tools that are available to us, but it's not feasible for most of us to have all of the tools or to know how to use all of the tools well. So we have to take occasionally a look at what's available to us, what we feel comfortable with, and what we may need to add to our technology toolbox. So the reality is that in this day and age, nobody starts from scratch when it comes to technology tools. We've lived in an internet computer age long enough that most of us have some level of experience with tools. We may not have used them in a while, they may no longer be necessarily fully available to us, but these are all the scaffolding upon which new skills are built and upon which new tools can be developed and adopted. So, what do we mean by nobody starts from scratch? Well, let's think about a tool that a lot of people felt very comfortable for a very long time using. That was PowerPoint. Well, what was PowerPoint used for? PowerPoint was used for presentations, it was used for communication. We could deliver content to students in this way, whether it was face-to-face and we were narrating the content, whether it was viewed online by the students. This was also a way that kids were showing us what they knew. So PowerPoint had a lot of functionality. It was a content delivery tool. It was, in a way, an assessment tool, a presentation tool, and a communication tool. Now, PowerPoint isn't necessarily as available on the iPad as it was on a PC. But this is where we begin to think about what other tools are available to us and what's in our technology toolbox. So let's take a look at another tool called Keynote. Keynote is Apple's version of PowerPoint and effectively does much of the same thing. This will be available to teachers and staff in our district. So if you're familiar with PowerPoint and have that as a baseline, you can build upon that to learn Keynote. Yes, it's a little bit different, and yes, there's a little bit of a different kind of feel to the tool, but with a little investment of time, you come in already knowing a lot about how presentation and communication tools work, and how those tools can be used in the classroom. Now you just need to figure out where the buttons and switches are in Keynote, and what other advantages it might offer you. There's another option. It's called Google Slides. Now this has been available for a couple of years. Google Slides has that same presentation feel, although not quite as powerful as PowerPoint or Keynote in the presentation side of things, but it does something different. It allows students to collaborate and they can publish worldwide. So those two key advantages are things that we can understand because we understand how Google generally works, because some of us have used things like Docs, and we understand that these two features are familiar in any of the Google tools, and we begin to see a merging of our knowledge, which was PowerPoint, and of our new knowledge, which is Docs, into something like Slides. So this is where we say nobody really starts from scratch. It's about understanding what tools are available to us, what they can do, which is the most important part, and then what our familiarity with those tools is. So at this point, I'd like you to pause the video and start to take a personal inventory on the tools that you have at your availability, that you presently feel comfortable using, even if you don't use them all of the time, tools that you have available to you that you know you feel comfortable using. Just as a reminder, you have tools on your iPad, on your MacBook, you have tools in your classroom, perhaps you have a smartboard, a document camera, something like that. You also have Blackboard, your Google Apps, and possibly other tools that you have available at your disposal. Once you've recorded these down somewhere, on paper, on a tablet, but write them down somewhere, make a list, hit play, and you can move on to the next slide. Okay, so now you've got your list in front of you, all the tools that you feel comfortable with. I guarantee there's probably more that you're missing, but at this point, this is just a working list. We can always add to it later. Now, what do we do with that list? Well, what we really need to do is start to categorize. figure out what we use those tools for in our classroom, think about all the things that we do in our classroom, and then the next stage is figuring out where the holes are. So what do I mean by categorize? Well, what are some of the common things that you might do in your classroom? Maybe you just have a general kind of organization in your classroom, right? How do you maintain organization? So maybe you had a file folder at one point, or you had a teacher's text that was marked up and labeled, or you had some sort of an overhead that helped you to be organized. Maybe now that tool is something like Blackboard, or iTunes U, or something else that you use. Okay, so that would be one category, and there's tools that fit underneath that. Well, we've got another one, content delivery. How do we deliver content to kids? How do they get it in a format that they can view at any time, any place? So that might be another category for you. Well, that again for me would probably fall under the category of Blackboard. But what else do I have? Well, I've also got some Google Docs that can do this. Perhaps I've got a site that does this for me. Lots of different tools that we can use to accomplish the same jobs. And there's no reason why any of these tools have to fall off the list. That doesn't mean that some are better than others. It simply is us categorizing the tools that we have. Maybe we have something for assessment. How do we assess kids electronically so we get quick feedback? Or, let's see, what else? Do I have any multimedia tools? Maybe for larger projects, I've got specific tools that I use for different kinds of projects. Oh, publishing. I want my kids to get their stuff out to a wider audience. How do we do that? So these categories aren't defined. I don't have a list of them that you can think from. What I really want you to do is think about your classroom practice, then think about what is it that I do, kind of create general categories, and start plunking the different tools that you've got available to you here. We're going to put iMovie under that one, and I'm going to use Smart Notebook under that one. So I start putting the general tools that I use into those different categories. With all of that said, what I'd like you to do is take your list of tools, pause the video, and begin to categorize. When you have finished, you can hit play and move on to the next part of the video. I do encourage you to write this down though, as we will be using this for our final part of this project. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we've got our list of tools, we've categorized them, but we have to ask ourselves a question. What's missing in our toolbox? So you can't cut wood if you don't have a saw. Well, you can, but it would be difficult. And sometimes it's easier to just go out and buy a saw or invest the time to learn how to use a new tool than to spend a lot of time trying to cut wood with a tool that's really not meant to cut wood. The same is true in the classroom. While Smart Notebook is a pretty good tool and can be used for assessment, maybe I need to do something more than just Smart Notebook. So I'm going to take some time and I'm going to invest in learning a tool called Socrative. Now maybe you don't know what these tools are named, and if you don't, that's okay. That's where we start to have a conversation about what are you trying to do. Here's a tool that might help. Any of your friendly tech coordinators or tech coaches or effectiveness coaches might be able to have that conversation with you as long as you come with an idea of what it is you want to do. As we look at this, though, we say there's some categories that are really very solid, right? So in content delivery, I've got this one knocked out. Blackboard does everything that I need it to do. But in multimedia, I do have iMovie, which I love, but sometimes a movie is just too big of a project. I want something smaller, so I'm going to invest in something called Explain Everything, a tool just like the one that is used to make this video, where people can write on it and I can get the kids thinking, but they don't have hours and hours of publishing and creating and perfecting and putting slow motion, and it's pretty simple and straightforward. So that's one for me that I'm going to invest some time looking at. Ooh, I've got a big gaping hole here in classroom management. Well, what do I need for a classroom management tool? I want something that when class starts right away at the beginning of the hour, I can get my kids engaged right away. Now this is where I challenge you to think about the tools that you do know. Well, Blackboard is a great tool for content delivery, could it also serve the purpose of being a classroom management tool? If I had my kids at the beginning of every class period understand that when they sat down and the bell rang, they would need to go into Blackboard, into a bell ringer kind of section, and get started there, that would aid my classroom management. And I wouldn't have a whole new tool to learn. I would just have to organize something differently on Blackboard. So Blackboard is actually going to fall under my classroom management tool. But it doesn't solve one problem I have. My kids generally come in pretty noisy from the hallway. So what I really need is an app that would indicate to them when their noise level is too high and when it's just right. So I'm going to see if there is some sort of an app that measures sound levels. So that would be something that I would go look for then. That would be an area that I need to research. Probably not a huge learning curve. I just would need to find the right tool for that. So you kind of get the idea. I start to fill in where my gaps are. I think about the tools that I do know how to use. And then it gives me a point where I can really focus on how to use certain tools differently and how to sometimes go out and find totally different tools. So what I'd like you to do at this point is to examine what's missing in your practice. What are the tools that are presently you're not using well, you're not using to their full potential, or you just have a gaping hole and you need to fill it with something, because this is something I do in my classroom. It's good instructional practice, but there might be a technology tool that makes it more efficient or makes me kind of just able to handle that task a little bit better, that engages students a little bit differently. That's the kind of thing I want you to think through. So pause the video. I want you to think about, in your tech toolbox, what's missing. I'd also write that down. All right, so hopefully you've done all the pre-work here. And now it's just a matter of putting it in a recorded format so that you can try out a new tool called Explain Everything. Now, some of you are very familiar with this tool, and that's great. As long as you have an iPad, this should be available to you, because this is what we call one of our core apps. It's one of the tools you should become familiar with. If you don't have an iPad available to you, that's fine. No problem at all. You can certainly do this on pen and paper. You could do this with any tool that's available to you. But what you're really doing is creating an understanding of what tools you have available to you, what tools you're going to use and use differently, and what tools you maybe need to invest some time in learning. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you first to create a slide and explain everything, or PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever it might be, in which you identify the tools you have. Second, I'm then going to have you categorize your tools, just like we did. Okay, what do they do for you in the classroom? And then third, you're going to create a slide in which you talk about the new tools you need to investigate. And I don't need these by name, because again, you may not know them, but I need them more by the job